Hi, I'm the director for our New Zealand registered charitable trust called Common Knowledge. And I've been involved in the childbirth conversation for 50 years. I'm beginning to feel old. And it all started in the early 1970s when I and hundreds of ordinary fathers and mothers developed a set of birth skills and how to prepare your body for birth for absolutely all births without exception. Birthing Better Families never were involved or invested in the concept that there was a versus viewpoint of birth, which there is and has been since the 80s. In other words, natural birth versus medical, home birth versus hospital, midwives versus doctors. And so we just developed skills. But in the process of developing skills in the early 1970s, all of these families realized that behind the skills was a concept. And that concept we felt back in the 70s, and I still feel strongly today and have spent the past time since then trying to explain and advocate and to get people to take on this concept, which is that when you're pregnant, it's normal and natural to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills, then use those skills to work through your baby's birth journey, no matter where a birth occurs, no matter who's present, no matter your circumstances or beliefs, no matter your choices or lack of choices or change of choices, or what happens to or around you. Why did Birthing Better Families develop this concept? It was very simple. We got pregnant to have a baby, not a type of birth. And all of us wanted a safe birth. That was foregone belief. But we also wanted to have a positive birth. And we couldn't control a lot of outside circumstances. All we could do was control how we worked through that activity. Over the years, I have listened to many, many, many famous people in the childbirth conversation. I've taught around the world in very, very traditional communities, as well as in modern communities. And this is where after COVID hit the road, I decided to come back out and try to explain that we really need to bring forward this concept that it's normal and natural when you're pregnant to self-learn birth skills and then use those skills to work through the activity of birthing your baby. Because women in modern countries have not been given accurate information by women in modern countries who believe in natural birth. The message from the natural birth movement has always been that women instinctively know how to birth. The other message is that before the medical profession, we were all taught how to birth and that we were all at births, and so therefore we knew all about births. And that's absolutely inaccurate, absolutely inaccurate. Traditional women around the world don't know they have a cervix. Where would they know that from? That's a scientific, it's a medical thing. Cultures split up birth very differently. Some cultures, women go off by themselves. Nobody's with them. And that's what they do. At others, women go off with older women and their family. And they go off often for months. And others birth wherever birth occurs. There's no ubiquitous midwife around the world. It's usually your aunt or your mother-in-law, or your grandmother or mother. And the fact is that we're plagued as human beings with a god-awful truth, which is there's no way to know what your birth's going to be like, right? But that's followed by an inaccurate statement, which is, therefore, there's nothing you can really do to prepare for it. If you, like me, had investigated traditional cultures, you would have found out that every traditional culture has a healthcare system, and they're very focused on the do's and don'ts during pregnancy, and they're very focused on the do's and don'ts after the birth. But no culture has a set of skills to work through labor, because up until very recently, we all labored, and we all gave birth vaginally. Some cultures do prepare the birth canal, most cultures don't. So what we need to ask is a bunch of questions, like, and this is what this talk is about. How did your mother teach you how to breathe in labor? If your mother gave birth to you by having labor and a vaginal birth, how did she breathe? And how did she teach you to breathe? And 99.9% of us would say, she didn't. And that would be true across the world, whether we're in modern cultures or traditional cultures. In fact, when I go into traditional cultures, and I mean very rural traditional cultures that have no running water, where people aren't literate, where they have no access to medical care, because our trust is committed to getting these skills out globally. And if you can help us do that, please do. So, for example, when I was in Pakistan, I had translators. They came from the Baha'i faith. I knew nothing about the Baha'i faith, but they worked in traditional communities and were willing to translate. So we'd gather women in the village, and they'd look at me, and I'd look at them, and I'd say to them, how do you see me? And well, they saw me as a woman, but then you could hear their minds spinning. She's not like us. She doesn't speak the same language. She doesn't wear the same clothes. She's obviously educated. She doesn't have the same color skin. And so they didn't see me the same, other than I was a woman. And so I'd say to them, do you blink? Yep. Do you cough? Yep. Can you tighten up your rectum? Yep. And then everybody would laugh, because we realized that there was a different level of commonality. And that commonality carries over across cultures as soon as a woman gets pregnant, because 100% of pregnant women around the world, throughout time, throughout place, will give birth one way or another. So the question is, how did your mother teach you how to breathe in labor? So I just say, how did your mother teach you to breathe in labor? And there's always dead silence, absolutely dead silence. Across the globe, dead silence. And I wait, because somebody's going to say something sometime. And then one woman would say, my mother told me to breathe slow and deep. And right away, another woman would say, that's not what my mother told me. She told me to breathe fast and shallow. That's not what my mother told me. My mother told me, hold your breath when it hurts. That's not what my mother told me. My mother told me, don't make a peep, you'll embarrass yourself. That's not what my mother told me. My mother told me that nothing you do is going to make a difference. That's not what my mother told me. My mother told me it hurts, and so you should scream all you want. That's not what my mother told me. My mother told me X, and it didn't work for me. And it just goes on and on. So in one village where people have lived together for generations upon generations, across the globe, village after village after village after village, you ask people, how'd your mother teach you to breathe in labor? There's either no answers or there's a bunch of answers, which brings us to the question, are we individuals or are we having a common universal experience? And the fact is 100% of pregnant women are going to give birth, so we have a universal experience. Is there more than one way to breathe in labor? Well, there's more than one way that we breathe as human beings. And we as Birthing Better Families figured that out. We had to figure out how we as human beings breathed. Then we had to figure out how we used those breathing patterns. Then we had to figure out how those breathing patterns could be used to adjust and adapt to the changes of sensations that we feel when we have a labor contraction. Because right now, and for the past 40 or 50 years, this is what I've heard people around the world say, well, when my labor started, the contractions, I didn't feel them really, so I didn't have any problem. And then after some time, well, I began to feel them, but they were really nothing. I just went about my day. Okay. Then, they began to be a little bit more intense. So I had to stop what I was doing and just wait, but they were manageable. And then a little while later, they began to hurt. So I just had to stop and I had to focus. And then a little while later it goes, they really began to hurt. And I was still coping, but it was hard. And then they just got so painful, I wasn't coping. And this is how women talk about labor. So, what are we hearing when women talk like that? One is they have no skills because they aren't using any skills. They're not talking about any skills. And why would you use skills? To cope with the natural, normal, occurring pain of labor contractions. Can skills cope with the most intense pain? Can breathing skills cope with the most intense pain? Yes, but we have to really dedicate ourselves to using those skills. And we have to have learned them, and they have to make sense to us. And we have to adapt them and adjust them as the sensations change in our body. So my mother didn't teach me how to breathe in labor. She never talked about it. The story I just gave you about women talking about their contractions, they're not telling us about skills they've used. They're just telling us about the level of pain they felt. They're not even telling us that each contraction has 5 phases, which Birthing Better fathers understood. And so we incorporated that as a skill, because when we had good breathing skills, then we could begin to breathe in a certain way in the beginning of a contraction, adjust our breathing as the intensity began to grow in the second phase. We could adjust our breathing during the peak or the most intense part. We could adjust our breathing as the contractions eased off, and we could adjust our breathing for the space in between. Without skills, the story was common. I coped, and then I didn't cope. So when we ask, did your mother teach you how to breathe in labor? The answer for most of us is no, which is really, really, really interesting, isn't it? Since throughout time, humans have given birth, and 100% of pregnant women who are pregnant today will all give birth, and we all have to breathe. We all take in an inhale, and we all take out an exhale. So Birthing Better families actually deconstructed this so that we could make sense of it. Because yes, we found out that there is a universal way to breathe in labor. It's one that adjusts and adapts and is sustainable. And it's based on the 4 ways that humans breathe and the variations of those breaths, of those four variations. So when I say that to you, and when I teach it and say to people in a workshop, what are the 4 ways that humans breathe? There's the same pause as in the villages when I said, how do your mother teach you to breathe? Which tells us it's not that we don't know, we're not accessing it immediately, which means we don't know how to access it to create adjustable, sustainable, and adaptable skills. So the 4 ways that humans breathe. No, it's not about the chest or in the belly. No, it's not about fast or slow, although those are components. It's about in the nose and out the nose, in the nose and out the mouth, in the mouth and out the mouth, and in the mouth and out the nose. Now you know that, but you always knew that. You just have never been asked, and no childbirth preparation class has taught that to you, and that has not been passed on through any of the childbirth messages. But we want that to change, because when you're pregnant, it should just be normal and natural to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills when you're pregnant and then use them in birth. And we can all have sustainable, adaptable, and adjustable breathing skills if we know how. So now you know that there are 4 variations. So then you have to ask yourself, when do I breathe in my nose and out my nose? Well, most of the time, if your nose isn't stuffed. When do you breathe in your nose and out your mouth? And most of us pause, because even though we do that, we haven't ever really been asked to identify the different ways we use in the nose and out the mouth just in living. So what are the ways? One is we can use it to relax with a slack jaw. We can use it to be very focused. We use it when we're climbing stairs or doing athletics. When we have sex. When we're moaning. When we're screaming. Ah! So this one variation in the nose, out the mouth, has lots of different ways we use it throughout our lives. So if we're experiencing pain, which one of those would you use if you had skills? Most likely, or even, or which ones would indicate to your birth providers or your partner that you're not coping? Or, ah! That's right. So in the nose, out the mouth can indicate we're coping or indicate we're not coping. You have the ability to pass this on to your children. Now, I'm not going to go over all of what we learned in Birthing Better because I really want to focus on this reality about our commonality and our individuality. So the natural birth movement's always been very clear in all of the times I've gone out and spoke about birth skills, is you shouldn't tell women what to do. Women should just do what they want. They know how to birth. They should be left alone. And any way that a woman breathes in labor is fine. So, and I have been with hundreds and hundreds of care providers, and they are perfectly comfortable with women doing this. Then the question is, are we as women comfortable in doing that? So the answer is very simple. If we lack skills, yes. And if we have skills, no. Because we know that that response is telling ourselves and other people that we are not feeling good about what's happening to us, that we're reacting to the pain, the natural and normal occurring pain of contractions, rather than responding. We don't feel in control. Birth is happening to us. We get through it one way or another, 100% of us. And we can still have a safe birth, yet many of us don't feel we've had a positive birth. And that's why birth skills are so important. Because instead of having 1 out of 20 women really look like they're coping, we can have 18 out of 20. Learning birth skills is a no-brainer in pregnancy. Try to start from around 24 weeks. There are various skills-based methods besides Birthing Better. Would our trust like you to use ours? Well, sure. Mothers and fathers develop the skill. We're the only skills-based method that are developed by mothers and fathers, and we're the only skills-based method really used for all births, and that really give you a common language to share. But there's hypnobirthing, there's calm birth, there's birthing within, there's Lamaze, there's the Bradley method, there's Grantley-Dick Reed. So you can choose which skills-based method. But tell your birth professional from 24 weeks, have them put down in your notes what skills you're learning. Or if you're a birth professional, give a handout to your clients and tell them it's an activity that they're going to do. So it's normal and natural, self-learn some skills, and then put the skills in their notes from 24 weeks onwards. So what happens at the birth? Well, if birth choices unfolds the way you want, great. And if you look like you're coping brilliantly, birth professionals, praise your clients. You love working with them. And if the women don't look like they're coping and the men don't look like they're helping, go back to the notes and remind them they learned skills. Sure, some people will say, I said I did, but I didn't. But most will say, well, something's changed in the birth and I didn't think that I could continue to use the skills in which you remind them at your baby's birth. You can always use breathing skills to birth your baby, whether it's driving to the hospital, being prepped, and lying on a table having surgery. Every breath in, every breath out is an opportunity for you to use a skill. And you should, because that is what gives you your sense of coping or managing, dealing with, working through, handling, staying on top of, and feeling in control. And that's what we want. Why do we want that? Because we want our experiences to be positive, and we want our birth stories, our birth memories to be positive. Does our breathing impact how they behave toward us? Not necessarily. Our breathing permits us to behave as so we cope and manage, deal with, handle, work through, stay on top of, feel in control. That's got to be good. That's got to be good. So if your mother didn't teach you how to breathe, and at least from this small talk, you can teach your daughters and sons that there are 4 ways that humans breathe: in the nose, out the nose, in the nose, out the mouth, in the mouth, out the nose, and in and out the mouth, and that in the nose and out the mouth has variations from to 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 ah. And what are you teaching your sons and daughters? Use that variation in a way that permits you to cope. And so generations from now, if someone asks this question, what did your mother teach you? How did your mother teach you to breathe in labor? You will have taught your sons and daughters. Now, why is it important to teach both your sons and daughters? Because we're all human beings, and we all use breathing in the exact same manner, which means that if your son is at a birth and he hears this, then he knows and he can model that. And the woman will follow him because that helps her get back in control. And that's important. So no, mothers around the world did not teach their daughters or sons how to breathe in labor. Maybe individual people did, rare as hen's teeth. So what are we left with? We're left with this huge void, which is there's no way to know what your birth's going to be like, and therefore there's nothing you can really do to prepare for it. So let's separate those 2 sentences. There is no way you're going to know what your birth's going to be like. It will unfold. And yes, you can learn. You should learn. You should want to learn. It's beneficial to learn. It's essential to learn. It's important to learn. It's possible to learn. Good birth and birth coaching skills when you're pregnant, and then use those skills to work through the activity of birthing your baby. 1 inhale at a time, 1 exhale at a time. Now, what did birthing better parents also develop as a skill? And it had to do with that inhale. So every time we inhaled, we expanded intentionally inside our bony pelvis. So just do that now. You can feel slight movement out. That's right, you can. We all can. That's neat. That's the universal. And on the exhale, just soften on the inside of the bony pelvis. So inhale and expand. And exhale and mentally go around the inside of your pelvis and soften. You can do that. Now inhale and expand again. And exhale and soften. You see, we put skills together so that they made sense, so that they were effective, so that they were sustainable, so they were adaptable. And so both the mother and the father, or the other person, understood them and felt them and could share those skills. So you be a mother who teaches your sons and daughters. You be a father that teaches your sons and daughters how to breathe in labor contractions. You do that. And to do that, learn some good breathing skills. Use them, evaluate them afterwards, and pass on why they work and how to adapt them and adjust them and make them sustainable. So thanks for listening. How can you help our not-for-profit? Well, you can purchase a Birthing Better online birth class. We have 12 of them, from breech births to home births to hospital births, to the complete skills, to just the body skills, or just the breathing language and touch skills. You can donate to our trust on the website, on the description. You can, as a birth professional, make a handout for your clients and tell them it's just normal and natural to learn some skills, and here's a handout, pick one or more, and then keep track of what skills they've learned, and then praise them if they're doing well, and just let them know that they did learn skills if they look like they're losing the plot, and to use those skills. And praise women and men both. When I gave birth in the 1970s, fathers were the birth coach. And when I gave birth last in the 80s, fathers had been demoted to being a support person. We have to remote them back to being the coach. They need to work through the birth journey with us because they are going to be fathers after the birth. And we, as women, want them to be capable and competent. And the way for them to be capable and competent, and the way for us to be capable and competent, is to use skills to prepare our body, learn skills and use skills in our baby's birth. Because then we're ready to go on to parent, whereas unskilled families often aren't. The memory of their birth still lingers, often with shame, blame, guilt, disappointment, anxiety, frustration. We don't want that anymore. So, this is the end of my little blurb about how did your mother teach you to breathe in labor. And if your mother did teach you to breathe in labor and it worked for you, make a comment. And if she did and it didn't work for you, what did you do then? So let's talk about it. Let's have discussions, because the more we have discussions, the more we'll understand that pregnancy and childbirth are one of those incredibly universal experiences. And luckily, we can share a set of common knowledge skills. That's why our trust is called Common Knowledge. So see you later, and thanks so much for listening.